Hey, welcome to this edition of The Bigger Game. Our guest today is Todd Lipa, the Executive Director of CARES in Farmington Hills. Hey, Todd, great to have you on the show today.
Hey, good morning, Abizer. Great to be a part of this. The bigger game has been a great podcast to watch, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be on here with you and talk a little bit about how that relates into our bigger game here at CARES.
Yeah, thanks for making the time. I know you're a busy guy running around doing 100 things, at with all the football and all the things that go on at CARES and everything else in between. You're a busy soul, so I appreciate the time today. Tell us what your version of the bigger game is. What does it mean to you?
Well, if we were talking my old football coaching days, the bigger game would be the one that's coming up the next week. But in this case, it's the bigger game to me is really what are we doing to make a difference? What are we doing in our communities to make a difference? How does each individual become part of that bigger game to make it more explosive, more heartfelt, more compassionate, more caring? So really, when you get into this game, it's the biggest game of all. I've been on the sidelines for many big games, but this game to me, the bigger game here is life itself. What we're doing to make a difference in the worlds that we live in, and the worlds that get expanded as we grow. So that's really my look at when you asked about the bigger game. It's the biggest game we can be a part of. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, and that's actually a fantastic way of going through every moment, right? If I use that as a sieve to determine what I'm going to do next in this current moment, what am I going to do, right? I think that I think the part you mentioned about lives at stake. I think that's a great perspective to carry and just move forward with. Like every small action either furthers that conversation or it doesn't. I don't think there's a neutral, right?
There is
So it's that's
everything is
fantastic.
an action or a reaction to it, depending how you look at it and how the game is being played. So, the game of life is the biggest game any of us get the chance to be a part of. So, the bigger game is right here. It's right now, and it's today, and what tomorrow is. So,
Yeah. So tell us a little about your journey and how you've kind of used that to navigate yourself and what you've learned and kind of share with us some of your wisdom here.
well, it's an interesting piece. I've been asked this the last few weeks, and I've done a couple speaking engagements where I've talked about cares at the very beginning and what this means to me. And this is the biggest game I've ever been in, and because it's gotten to be feeding 822 people. It's gotten to be having all the programs that we have on our campus of hope. And I say that as a start because in my journey, it has to go all the way back to 1968 when I was 10 years old. I took the chance to learn the hardest lesson you can learn in the game of life. And that's when I had to witness the death of my mother on August 12th of 1968. As a 10-year-old, I had questions. I hated why that happened. I couldn't understand the first thing about it. Um, but later in life, the game came around to teach me some of the values of what I lost, but how I was going to gain in the process. So when I first lost my mom and my grandmother had to come in to raise eight of us that lived at home from the age of 2 to 16 years old, I really wondered how any of us were going to do that. And in my own personal life, I struggled and always had people to lift me up. When I fell, there was someone there. And that's where, when you ask the question, the game, the bigger game, I really look back with no sympathy at all. I never would want that in a million years. But at the age of 12 and a half, 13 years old, I left home. And there was reasons to leave home at that time. You wouldn't maybe do that today. But I found a Beezer and everyone who's watching the real gift of family. And that doesn't have to be the family that you're birthed into, it's the family of a community. So take a 13-year-old kid, he goes down the street and he moves in with a family that he delivers papers to. And I lived there for about a year. Then all of a sudden, I get a job at a drive-in theater in Farmington Hills, and I'm made to move from that house to another. So I get to live a few months with another person. I live with a paper route manager for a few years. I go and live with my sister for a year, and by all those times, I ended up having each and every time I needed a place, the community stepped up. Football coaches that I had in my lifetime took me into their home. I got to spend a summer with a couple coaches. So when I really look back at life and what taught me where I'm at, I truly believe the higher power that I believe in gave me all of these people for a purpose. Each one of them taught me a different part of the game. The game of life was a really interesting thing because when I needed some direction in my teen years, I had a couple of guys that did that. When I needed direction and I didn't have it from my own father, which God love him, he did the best he could, but there were times that he struggled. And I found different people in my later teens. And then I even found guys that I could count on to give me guidance when I was even in my late teens into my 20s. And by having that, I think back all these years later, and I wondered at times, but I understand the answer, is the reason I can do what I do today, and the reason when you said I've got 101 things on my plate, guess what? I'll take 102. Because if I hadn't had that education and I hadn't had those gifts between the age of 13 and 20, God only knows what I would have done. But when I see a family walk into cares and I see burden on their shoulders and I can see that they're stooped over, it's different than when I was coaching. Someone gets tired, their shoulders go forward, their arms hang down to their side, or they put their hands on their hips. The same thing you watch when a person gets out of their car. They're leaning forward. They're struggling to sit up or stand up. Their hands are, way down at their sides. They're tired. And they're not tired physically. They're tired of fighting the fight. But somehow or another, when they come into cares and they're greeted by our guests or our staff, they can walk out of here with their shoulders more straight up, a smile on their face. And that's that same 13 to 20-year-old kid who played in this game of life that needed to turn around to somebody, that needed to count on somebody. And I had my grandmother, who was the greatest person I ever could imagine, but she left this earth at 18 years old. So when she passed away, now I was going into my first years of working, and she was excited because I got my first full-time job, and then we buried her 6 months into my job. And I don't regret any of that. Do I wish I had, as the song says, just 5 more minutes? Boy, I'd take 5 more minutes to say, hey, Mom, what did you think? What did we do right? What did I do wrong? But those days will come one day down the road, and I'll have that 5 more minutes, and we'll be able to share with each other. But I tell you, every one of those guys I lived with have passed away. But I thank them every single day for the lessons of life that they gave me so that I could play in this great, big, huge game. And I think every day, the bigger game is what they taught me to prepare me for the biggest game is right now in my life, what I'm doing today. And that's helping 822 families just a little bit with a touch of hope, with a touch of dignity, and a touch of whatever we can give them in the way of respect and dignity.
So in some ways, all those people are participating with you in uplifting those families, right? They all have a small contribution in this entire process and play a role in supporting so many families. And that's a current number, but over time, however many that's been, they've been involved in all of that. So if you take a look at actions that I take today, the small ones, the big ones, whatever they are, right? I have no idea. I mean, the ripple effect we think about is in current time. I tell you something and you light up and you go tell someone else that. However, looking at it 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 50 years down the road, you have no idea what one thought or one comment today makes a difference down the road. We have no idea.
You can't. And, most don't know this. I do talk about it a little bit when I'm lucky enough to go out and share. But, I spent from 10 years old in November of 1968. I took a paper route. I lied about my age. I feel bad about that today, but I'll get over it. So I lied because I knew to get a paper route you had to be 12, and I was only 10. But I got this paper route, and I worked for a guy by the name of Ray, and he was my first real lesson of learning life. And he and I would run around town working together. I was what they called his jumper. I would throw papers out when he was driving. And, at 18 years old, the day after I turned 18, the Detroit News hired me. Well, 6 months into my career, I bid on a job to work with a guy by the name of Joe, and he was an Italian guy that had the best of sense of humor, could laugh all the time. But Joe got me involved in the Teamsters. And Abizer, I can tell you the first thing I learned from Joe and the rest of the leadership there as they groomed me to one day possibly do that was how to listen. They said, you don't get a chance to talk. You're too young and you don't understand. So listen to what happens in these negotiations. And I heard from both corporation leaders and union leaders, and I learned how to negotiate. And the greatest gift I learned was to listen. And then, in Joe's teaching, it was the day-to-day parts of life. He went through struggles in his life, lost a child. I lived through those with him and got to understand that part of it. And then the day came when the Detroit News went on strike. And at the time, I was volunteering for city stuff, and I was volunteering as a director of Special Olympics. And we became a very top-notch Special Olympic team here in Farmington Hills. 200 kids on our program, and I had the opportunity to take 15 young men, along with 4 other coaches and myself, and we traveled the country. And the traveling around the country wasn't just because we wanted to say, hey, look at us. It was because a young man said to me that he didn't want to be Special Olympic anymore. He didn't want to be special. Well, there's no way to change that. He was hit by a car in a bike accident and lost some of his ability to negotiate his own way through life. So he taught me one day when he said, Coach, if I don't need to be special, how come I can't be normal like everybody else? He said, why can't we play baseball everywhere? Well, I said, you know what? We can. He goes, well, if we're so good, let's go to Florida. And we went down to the Tigers in Lakeland, Florida, and we spent a week with them. Had the greatest trip that you could ever imagine. And then 26 states later, we traveled to. The whole mission of it, Beezer, wasn't about playing softball. The idea was to teach people how you could look at kids with special needs and hire them. Because if you hired them, they'd have a lifetime job because they'll work as hard as you can. So my lesson there in that life, in that bigger game that I played then, was no matter what you do, you still have a purpose. And also what I learned by them is no matter what happens in your life, build it better than what it is when you got there. Because the bottom line is one day you may be in that same program. Because only by the grace of God go I. And that's what I learned. Because I also thought that those kids were all born with a disability. Many of them weren't. In fact, the majority of them were not born that way. It was a car accident. It was this, it was that. So that was a great life lesson, especially as a coach who had been working to put kids in college and stuff. That was a great lesson in the world of life. And then,
how many times do we see people that that come up across some serious situations, and really take life on at a whole new level and live life more fully than people who are, are fully functional, or whatever the right term might be, right?
Yeah.
It's an amazing situation. That lesson could be a whole podcast by itself.
It could be a whole podcast, because as one family taught me, when their son, and he was quite the athlete and a scholar himself, got hit in a car accident and thrown through the window. And I asked him one day, "How did you ever deal with that?" And they go, "We buried our son," and I won't say his name, and then we took on our new son, and both taught us a lot of valuable lessons. And today, that young man is probably 40 years old. Um, and then that was my introduction to the city. And then I got asked to be part of a commission on children, youth, and families, and a new, bigger game started. I was invited in to help build a commission on children, youth, and families. And then I got asked to be the first chair of that. And our whole goal was to make Farmington and Farmington Hills better for families that lived in our town. And then right away, we got an opportunity through a grant that came across the police desk, and we built the after school program. So in 1995, when the Detroit News went on strike, and I had, just a little under 20 years with them in all total, I got asked by the city manager, Bill Kostick, if I would open up the after school program that I helped to write the grant for. And that was another change in life. I went out and found 30 kids, sat down with them for half a dozen Saturdays, and we built the largest after school program for middle school kids in the country. Easy to do. I put the power in the voice and the arms of the kids who wanted to build their own program. And by the time I left the city and the time that COVID hit, there were over 17,000 kids that had traveled through our program. And today, the calls I still get, the emails I get, the letters I get, Todd, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm around this part of the country, I'm a doctor without borders, I'm feeding the hungry in this place. I'm a youth director over here, I'm the youth pastor at our church. Every one of those are just more amazing. I've got a young woman in Texas who's doing research around, diversity, and she wrote a diversity piece for Farmington Public Schools. I've got another one who at night gets on Channel 2 and does the TV anchor and on the street reporter. So a guy that never had his own kids. I also, as I told this group last week, the bigger game was God knew not to give me kids, because I would have been a father like many of you and the folks I've met it around. I would have given my time to my own kids, and I probably would have missed the opportunity to have a point in the lives of so many other kids.
Wow, that's a priceless thought, because so many people, there's a significant enough portion of the population has a struggle with that, right? Not having kids of their own, and the emotion and all that goes with that. And what you just shared about how your time would have been spent, and then how it did get spent. You basically have, what do you say, 16,000, 17,000 kids, right? And then, even before that, all your mentors before that got you to that place, right? They played some small part. Again, going back to the beginning, they played some small part in that as well, in mentoring all those kids along the way, because through you.
And on the selfish side of it, as these kids became very successful over all those years, and they became people in the TV world, as they became researchers, as they became fundraisers, as they became, youth pastors, as they became doctors and dentists and lawyers, I reminded them all who helped them to get there, and not to forget the old man that used to run the youth centers, because I may need them one day. So keep my number on hand, answer the phone when I call you, because I gave you my time. And one day when I can't remember who in the hell I Todd's phone call. So it was a little bit selfish, I guess, when I joke about that, is just to, if I only had one or two kids, then I would have only had one or two, but now I got hundreds to call on when something might happen to me. So.
Well, that reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever read the book Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. Have you read that book?
Can't say I have, no.
There's along his journey, he talks about how he, navigated life, and I won't get into it for the case this time of the podcast, but there's a dean of one of the schools that he goes to, is in a similar position. He keeps track of all the graduates. He's like the guy. So whenever they need something after they graduate, they call him. And because he's done so much for all the other graduates, that he's got access to all the graduates. So like he talked about the fact that he was in a political campaign and was in the throes of, in the middle of that campaign and working for that campaign. And suddenly the lights went out. They ran out of money. Everyone went home and they were out in the street and didn't know where to go. So he called up the dean, and the dean asked him where he was, and to call him back in 20 minutes, half hour, whatever. And he calls him back and he goes, yeah, there's a graduate who lives 20 minutes from where you're at. He's waiting for you. Here's his address. You can spend the night, a few nights there, and kind of get yourself back on your feet. It's one small story out of the entire book, right? That reminds me of the capability you have there now as you stay in touch with these young people.
Well,
to help support yourself and support them, as they support each other, right? I think it's a great place to be. Maybe it's the next version of the bigger game for you.
It's an example of that is last Thursday, I received a phone call from a partner who their organization wants to look at more of the transitional housing and transitional life for kids who are aging out of the foster care program. Well, I was happening to watch Channel 2 News a few weeks back, probably 6 weeks ago, and watched a program just on that. So when I didn't know, when this group called me up, I said, I don't remember exactly what day it was, but let me call my contact at Channel 2. It was a young man who was in our youth program. So I called David and I said, I need to know this, and this about the story you did. He sent me all the information, and this group contacted Dave right away, and they're getting information so that they can look at what's happening here in the Detroit metropolitan area around fostering kids into the transition of housing as they age out of the foster care program. So, that was a connection that I look at. How lucky was I to run a youth program where I got to be a part of all these different kids' lives, but now I can also push information onto different ones, who have the expertise now as grown adults on how they can help a different group. So
yeah, I would call that being a connector, right? You're like the pinwheel of around this entire thing, right? You're holding us all together and bringing people together as appropriate to connect and to further a cause. I think that's fantastic.
It's a real blessing to have the connections I've had in life, not only through the Detroit News, through the city of Farmington Hills, and the others that came out of that between Farmington and traveling the country with this city, learning about government and how things should work and the best way to do some practices. I was blessed. And then to even stand on the sidelines of football fields. I did that for 40 plus years, and just having that opportunity to learn and how to negotiate a good game and how to, utilize another great lesson as a coach, if I can, was learning how to utilize the people on your team to the best of your ability. Instead of staying on track all the time and running the same things that you think are the best, sometimes, as I learned from my coaches, who are amazing gentlemen, and learning how to use what you're given to have the strength of the best that you can. And when I got hurt in my high school years and I had to step away for a year from an injury, and thank God I could walk today, because some thought maybe that wasn't going to be the case. I learned standing on the sidelines watching my coaches exactly how to coach, how they worked with kids, what they did, how they made it all happen, and how they became part of this bigger game than just the game between the white lines. A football field is 53 and a half by 100 yards, but that is only that little spot on God's earth. The bigger game is really what happens outside those lines. And as good coaches teach, it's about how you work as a team, how you bring the team together, how you make sure everybody from the water boy to the head coach is part of the game that can win. And I never forget an example I learned in Arizona by a great coach. The team was thinking that the water boy wasn't really important until 100 and some degree day when the water wasn't sitting where it should normally be. And all of a sudden, who became the most important guy when you're sweating was the water boy. And as this coach explained in his after coaching meeting, he said, when you don't think someone's important on your team, just wait till you need them. He said, just think if we didn't have the water in Arizona, it'd be hot. Just think if we didn't have the equipment guy, so when you get a helmet gets broken in the game, he puts a new one on you and fixes it as quickly as possible. You may lose one or two or three plays. If the guy doesn't help you set up the practice field or the coaches don't make it, that's what I learned. That's what I learned about the bigger game. The bigger game is about everybody having a place in it. And how do you fit in that game? You don't have to be a genius or an expert or someone with millions of dollars. You have to be willing to play in the game and do your part that you're good at. Do your part. And if you're a big enough person to be able to say, I can't do it all, I need the people around me to make the team the best, then you're going to have the best. And that's what I've watched in my lifetime. The ones who can do things better than others have just surrounded themselves with the best team they can. And you as the head coach, if you ever think that you're bigger than the team, you better step back and get the hell out of the game, because all you're doing then is blowing a whistle. You're not making a difference.
Yeah, I think it goes two ways, right? That sense of, everyone plays a part, and I'm an important part of that team, right? I'm not above it, not below it. I'm part of that team. And then also looking at every other member that way as well, right? Like they have a role to play, right? And so that role is just as important as everybody else's. I think that's a key nugget as well. Well, you've shared quite a bit in just a few minutes.
Yeah, your important statement though was, how all of the people from the time that I can remember to just today, every single one of those people either that have been called home or are living on this planet today, you said it, every one of them has played a role. In fact, as you said, every one of them are still playing in the game with me. It's just a different place that they come from. It could be a blessing that they throw down on my wish list, and it comes from somewhere I don't even know. Or it's that person who just called me before our podcast and said, we want to bring a bunch of people in next week to have a meeting at yours, and they're all leaders of a large industry. So it's that kind of stuff. I love the title of your show. I love the bigger game, because that can go any way you want it to, but really the bigger game is what your community teaches, what you have shared, what your family has taught me, and what you consider the bigger game. And that is just giving a little time back to making this world a better place than when you got here.
Excellent. That's a great wrap up. Is there anything else you want to say about any of that to bring us all home here?
No, just continue to do your good work, your community's work. Keep going for the Lions this year, that game. Every time Jared throws a touchdown, we're excited here at Cares. We're really happy that a person like he, who to me is not a hero. He's just, he's a gifted person who has the chance to play a game. And but he gave his time and his energy and some of his money to support CARES. And we just really appreciate people checking in our website, going on to caresfh.org, giving us a call here at our site or on. And what we ask everybody is be a foot soldier. If you've heard this podcast today and there's something in it that touched your heart, share it. And most importantly, share it, first of all, with someone who lives in one of the 8 communities we serve, if they need us. And that could be for any of our programs. Second of all, is you're someone who believes in making sure no one goes hungry and that we can fight suburban hunger. Give us a call and ask how you can become part of this amazing family that's called CARES, that is trying to do the thing to make our game the biggest game it can be. But the biggest game will be as we help each other. The bigger game is right there. It's helping each other.
Excellent. How do we contact you? I'm sorry, have you done? Were you saying something else?
Pardon me? They can contact.
Were you saying something else? I thought you were done. Go ahead.
No, you were asking me where they can contact us at. So.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So www.caresfh.org is our website. They can contact me right here at my own phone, 248-231-8493, or they can email me at tlipa, L-I-P-A, at caresfh.org.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Great to have you on the show, Todd. Thanks for taking so much time today and sharing your nuggets. They're priceless. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abizer. Thanks for the chance to be part of the bigger game.
All right.